I want to be like Joe Rogan. I want to be like Joe Rogan. I want to be like Joe Rogan when I grow up. So if you're planning to start your podcast with the intention in mind that you're going to model Joe Rogan, you are destined to fail in your podcast journey. So we're going to talk about three main reasons why if you try to model your podcast like Joe Rogan, or if you want to be like Joe Rogan, why it cannot work out for you at all, or why you'll not be able to sustain it. Hey guys, Arjun here back in this video, and we're going to talk about three main reasons about why if you model Joe Rogan, it might not work out for you. So one thing to keep in mind is prior of Joe Rogan starting his podcast, he built his brand equity from stand-up comedy almost 30, 35 years, 40 years ago. And then in 1997, he came into UFC and building these massive connections and building his brand exposure, having this set of network. And after that, almost 12 years later in 2009, he started his own podcast. Now, his intention of podcast versus your intention of podcast can be different. So the very first thing which is important and which is different in his case versus your case is the intention and the purpose of your podcast. What is your purpose looks like? Is it interviewing random people or anybody you want, or do you want to have some specific type of people on your podcast with a certain intentions? For example, when I wanted to start up my podcast back in 2020, I really just wanted to learn people for free at no cost. And that was the very first sort of the intention I had in my mind. I had no intention about hey, I'm going to start this podcast production agency, or I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. The sole purpose was I would love to learn from people that I follow and I aspire to be for free at no cost. That was the reason I wanted to start my podcast. And that's exactly how I started my podcast at first. So if you're going to have any intention or any purpose in mind, that will help you or that will enable you to have more clear idea about what the exact purpose is going to be. If there is at least a step-by-step plan, or at least the first step or the initial steps plan, you're going to get more clarity rather than to be saying super broad that I want to be like Joe Rogan when I grow up. So that's the very first point. The second point that is really important is for Joe Rogan, he can go randomly. He can go and be able to choose anybody he want to be on the podcast. Even right from the beginning, he didn't have any proper niche in place. He just wanted to have interesting people and having interesting conversation and having anybody and everybody that he wants to learn from, or he wants to talk to, or any topic that he's looking forward to. So he invited all different type of people. If you just see on his YouTube channel, you see there are all different type of people with all different type of topic. While that worked out for him because of, first of all, his almost 20 years of brand equity that he built, and after that, of course, he started his podcast, and then they also enabled and empowered him more.
That might not work out for you because you might not have the same brand equity as
he have. So that will definitely not gonna work out for you, because when you start to have random people, you might feel good about it at first in the beginning. You're super excited. You're I'm having this person, I'm having this person, I'm learning from this and this and that. It's a lot of diversified distractions because it's not a laser focused plan or goal of what type of guest you want to have. For example, when I started a podcast, I was I just want to have entrepreneurs or business owners on my podcast. So I know these type of people I want to have on the show. If somebody is from a medical niche or health niche, I would love to talk about how health as a business actually works. Or if somebody is in music, I would love to know about how music from a business perspective can work. So I can mold those type of people on my show and be able to still pull out questions based off whatever the topic I have, so that I can make it more niched down compared to make it more broader. So if somebody asks me that who do you interview or what your podcast is about, if you be hey, this is Joe Rogan, then it's it's a pretty vague answer, because Joe Rogan means you are open for everything and anything. There is no exclusivity, there is no specificity into it. The best thing what people say is riches in the niches, and that's exactly why it's really important to understand that if you want to start a podcast, you should not go broad. So I'm going to give some examples. For example, if you're going to be hey, I want to be the John Show, which is kind of similar, using your personal brand name compared to the Joe Rogan Show. If you're using terms like that, it's great. You want to put that name as upfront in your personal brand, which is a great thing. But the problem with using those type of names for your podcast is you are linking everything with your name. So when you're trying to create different distribution channels, different platforms, or different products, you try to make them individual so that they can have their own entity, they can have their own identity, and you are kind of the part of it, you're still there, people still know you, you're still growing, that it's kind of like not attached to it. So that is one thing that you should not supposed to be doing. Like, hey, the John show or the Joe Rogan show, it was working out for him because he had this floor or the opportunity to make those things work out for him. And for most people who are starting out with their podcast, even if they had some sort of resources,
it might not work out.
so the best way to have even a podcast name when we talk about being in niches is like there are so many other examples of it. For example, My First Million by Sam and there was another co-host. But My First Million is another podcast which is pretty decent about like, okay, what's this podcast is about? Like, what is the purpose of the podcast, right? Which states it like pretty much like clearly upfront without thinking about anything else. For example, Stephen Bartlett have a podcast. It's called Diary of a CEO. It's all about talking with like different types of CEOs, different types of business owners, from his perspective as a host, it was his intention about like, hey, what he's actually consuming from these people and called as the Diary of a CEO. There are some other names that you can possibly go after. For example, by Alex Ramosi, he have a podcast called The Game. Now, even that name possibly work out for him, but in the past, like he had podcasts around gym stuff, and so it was like more related towards gym. So if I just pull out like some more names for the podcast name, just to get you guys a little bit of a like idea about like how the naming convention should work. So let's go for top charts. Let's pull out some names and see like how that works. If I go in and search around health, I can be able to find something around health stuff that is related to health that's easy for somebody to not only know, but can also be remembered. For example, the School of Greatness, that's another set of podcasts or another name of podcast other than be like the Lewis Howes Show. Something like that might not work out for most people. Or the Anxiety Coaches podcast. That is kind of like the other name that is more relevant around the niche or around your product or service or who you are. It makes it more easier for other people to understand like what this podcast can be about. There could be several other like Anger Management or The Ultimate Human by Gary Brecka. Like, so names like these helps to make it first of all niche down before anything else. Before even you start doing any episodes, the name itself can make it more niche down compared to just the John show or the Your Name show. Stuff like that would not work out. So there could be another examples too. For example, if we go to finance, then finance, there can be multiple options. This was like Rich Dad Radio Show, so that's a different example. Financial audit, it's like I'm assuming like most of these podcasts is gonna be around like financial audit, okay, like or more interviews. If you can see like the interviews that are coming here, it's more towards financial stuff or like how those things are in general, or Her Money, like again the Investing for Beginners podcast. The reason why all these names actually get utilized so that it becomes really easy for people not only to remember this but also be able to make it easier for categorize your audience or create your audience according to that, rather than make it like so broad, so niche, because then not only you're gonna get confused, your audience, your listeners, even your
upcoming podcast guests is gonna be confused because they're gonna be like, hey, it's too broad.
And not everybody can be like Joe Rogan in that case or format. The other thing, if you think about which is the other thing, is how you're gonna sustain it. That's also the really important part, like how you're actually planning to sustain it. Are you gonna back it up with a sponsor, which is definitely not realistic at first, because when you're gaining attraction, sponsor would not like to go in and be able to promote their product on your distribution channel. The other option comes up into play is promoting your guest's affiliate product. Like if you're promoting your guest affiliate product in under their podcast episode descriptions, all that, that is the other way you can make money. Or the third method is how you can personally go in and be able to plug in your products or your services through your podcast. Maybe like the ads you're using in your podcast can be promotions of your products or your services, or even in the descriptions, or maybe you can try to sell to guests. They're going to be like some other videos that I'm going to be posting about like how you can monetize your podcast in more detail. But these are the things that need to be keep in mind too, because if you're relying on sponsors when you're starting out, chances are that might not work. Now, if you're somebody who are making over 7 figures or more and want to start their podcast and want us to handle full production from end to end, from thinking about like what the podcast name should be like, to like the initial launching of the podcast, to the end-to-end production of all podcast episodes, there's going to be a link down below in the description. You can click on it, you can book a call with our team, and we would love to help you out. And for others who are just starting out and want to learn about how to start a podcast or how to launch their own podcast, there's a link down below for you guys too, so you can like learn how to start your own podcast and grow from there. So yeah guys, this is it for this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.